Hello, and thank you once again for joining me. First, I want to apologize. I missed last week. A lot has been going on, namely the flu. Um, yeah, so I apologize for that. This week, I plan to show you a pink shirt that I sewed together. It was originally going to be a traditional men's button down shirt, but it kind of morphed into something totally different. Well, I guess I'll show you what happens. So here we go. Now, the pattern I got by essentially finding a tiny, tiny pattern online and basically just made the shoulders wide enough so that I knew they would fit the doll, and then I added a whole bunch of length because Smartdolls are very, very tall. And I found that proportionately, that's an easy, quick, and kind of dirty way to alter patterns. I did on this project make a mock-up and try it on, and I think I changed like one thing and I don't even remember what it was, so I apologize for that. But we have footage of actually sewing the shirt together, so I thought I'd show that to you. And the first thing I do is basically go around every single edge with the fray check. That's a lot of fray check. I definitely prefer to cut long edges with the pinking shears, and I think I'm going to go back to doing that. But it is so nice to sew stuff together once it's been fray checked. So, I don't know. Still kind of on the fence. And once the fray check dries, you might have noticed that I did actually draw the pattern piece on, and then I just cut out the seam allowance around that. So it did leave pencil markings all over the inside of the shirt. It was kind of an experiment to see if I could tolerate it, and it worked pretty okay, except for a couple of areas where I had to work with the area for so long that I ended up smudging the pencil everywhere. Like the collar was a pretty good example. It didn't care for that part, so I don't know if I can recommend it. And you can kind of see I am putting a pleat in the cuff. And I want my pleats to face a certain direction. Basically, they both have to be facing the same direction, and ideally that would be towards the back or the center back, whichever makes more sense to you. And you want them to look even, of course. What you definitely don't want is for them to not be symmetrical. That would drive me absolutely bonkers. And then I was figuring out how I wanted to put the top yoke on for the back piece. I decided to squish the bottom center back between the top yoke and the top yoke lining, which is the only part of this shirt that's lined. I don't know, sometimes I just make stuff up. So now we're sewing all of the seams that we just pinned, including the cuffs and then along the collar. For the collar, I go down to the end of the pattern piece, not the end of the seam allowance. There's a reason for that. Makes it a little easier later on. And then I top stitch the top yoke just to make it look a little fancier. Now we need to turn the collar. So we do a lot of clipping because at this scale, if you don't, you're gonna regret it. I grab my handy dandy pointy piece of plastic and start poking into the corners to get them as sharp as possible. Again, at this scale, it tends to matter just a little bit more. So you can see I even go in and start shaving a little bit more off because it didn't look like it was going to lay flat. And more, because it was being especially stubborn. And this is the part where I was talking about how it seemed like I got smudged graphite from the pencil everywhere. Yeah, that was totally it. So now we're going to do the pleats in the shoulders. And again, this one's, honestly, I kind of tried it both ways and then picked the one that I thought was the most visually appealing and then just strove to make them all symmetrical. It's pretty much the best game plan for pleats. It takes a lot of fiddling though, as you will notice. Even having them marked perfectly doesn't seem to make it easy. Because you want them to lay nice, and yeah. Then you can see me checking to make sure they look right from the front and deciding that they definitely do not. I gotta say, I'm gonna leave the pleats out next time. At least until I decide I want something visually interesting again. And if you're unfamiliar with the front facing being done in the way that you can see, it looks like, well, that's not going to overlap, right? Well, you're absolutely correct. You fold back the facing on the center front, and it makes 2 layers for your buttonholes if you were going to make buttonholes. We are absolutely not going to make buttonholes, but it also gives you a nice clean edge in the front, which is what I wanted the facing for. We'll see more of the facing here in a bit. Ah, yes, especially because we're putting the collar on now. So the trick with collars is remembering that the line of the pattern piece is going to match up, but the line of the seam allowances do not always match up. So I actually did, I think off camera, make a couple of snips along the front of the shirt, specifically so that I could pin the collar down correctly. And then I just based that down on the 1 layer, because you definitely need that to stay in place for the next step, which is going to involve the facing. So now I ironed my facings down so that my front would lay nice. And with right sides to right sides, we're going to sandwich in the collar with the shirt and the shirt facing, if that makes any sense. Hopefully you can kind of see what's going on. This is why we needed our collar to sit nicely, because if it slides around during this part, you're in a world of hurt. And this way, when you push everything so that it is right sides facing out, your collar will stand up and you'll have a little faux lining in the front. After heavily snipping the edges, because yeah, it's not going to want to lay flat if you don't do that. But you can kind of see there, you've got your little lapel now. My big regret with this shirt was that the collar I don't think is actually long enough to do the job I wanted it to do. So it does smoosh a little bit in an unflattering way. This is also a part where you're going to want to heavily use your iron. Just iron all that junk flat. And now we're adding on our sleeves. This is something you've seen before and it doesn't change a whole lot. I tend to either pin the middle first or pin the two edges first and then pin the middle. Since I had the middle marked clearly on this pattern, I just did the edges first and then fill in all the little gaps, try to make it smoosh in there as nicely as possible so that you don't end up with bubbles in your seam. And I guess I forgot my light, so it's a little dim, sorry about that. But we just sew along the shoulder seam. Very, very slowly and with a lot of fussing because I made the sleeve cap on this a little bit too tall, I think, which can contribute to making this very difficult at doll scale. But not impossible, so we're going to do the next one because it's easier than going back and changing it. I apparently lost the footage of sewing the second sleeve on, but it's okay because it's literally exactly like the first one. So next up we just sew down our cuffs, and you can see our cute little decorative pleat there swing by super fast. And then we fold them in half basically so that we can sew along the bottom arm sleeve and then down the side. I do tend to do a lot of random pinning at the sewing machine table, so I apologize that it's kind of off camera and you can't see it, but it does help to keep things nice and neat, even if you only use a few. So I tried it on the doll, off camera apparently, sorry about that, and did a few adjustments. I pinned the back in a way that I thought looked fairly flattering, and I realized that the side seam needed to come out a bit. We needed to open that, and I thought just as a decorative thing, so I'm raising the side seam up to where I had pinned and marked where I thought it should go. And then I measure the tucks that I had pinned in, and I used a little bit of math, and I'm a very visual person, so I draw myself a little picture, but I needed them to be even, obviously, and what I had pinned was not quite even, so I just measured and sort of took some middle ground. Just to get an idea. I take all the pins out and I smoosh out the pinholes because with fine fabric sometimes they stick around. I still don't have my light on, I'm so sorry guys. But we're just sewing around the split side on both sides. It's totally a design feature, it's not that it didn't fit right. Right? Yeah. And apparently I remembered my light this time. But I went, and off camera I did iron down the hem on the back and the front, and because I did fray check it, I just did a very simple hem. I figured the fray check will keep it together and it'll be alright. I do use a pin to make sure my edge looks okay going in. Alright, so now we have buttons, and I get to decide which kind of buttons I like. Because I have multiple tiny white buttons. And I definitely preferred the bigger ones on this shirt. I thought the color was better because the tiny ones look a little bit on the ivory side. And the size was just fine because it's an SD size doll, so she can use a slightly bigger button and it'll still be proportionate. So I have a ton of footage of me hand sewing these on, and then a bunch of footage of me not hand sewing them on 3 more times because I was stubborn and I didn't measure the buttons like I should have and just kept winging it. I don't recommend that. So maybe in a future video I'll show you how to measure where exactly to put your buttons and how to mark it. Like, not an idiot that I was being in this video. So we're gonna skip past all the painful button sewing. Oh wait, I lied. Apparently I was just tacking down the facing on the inside. I mean, the button thing definitely is going to happen and we're going to skip over it, but for now, sewing down the facing. Kind of try to show you exactly what I did there. Just a couple of stitches in the seam, and that's just to keep it in place, otherwise it gets a little squirrely. Oh yeah, I remember now. I was having a lot of issues because my needle kept breaking. Apparently, if you buy cheap, terrible dollar store needles, sometimes they're bad. Who knew? I'd never broken a needle like that before, but like normally you break the needle and it's just the eye no longer holds thread. You just break out part of the eye of the needle, right? Nope, this one just, I was pulling on it and it snapped in half. It was the weirdest thing in the world. But now we're moving on to the decorative, I don't know what you want to call it, decorative tacking. Basically just going to sew on a little couple buttons and a little piece of ribbon to make it look like it was totally intentional and not that the shirt didn't fit without it. And I'm very carefully measuring it to make sure that it stays. And I don't know why I'm doing it like 8 times. I don't think I was really with it this day, as I am clearly not really with it while recording. So hey, it works out, right? But anyway. I'm using the safety pins to pin it in place so that I know that it's exactly even. Alright, yep, this is where I messed up, and don't follow this method. Just please look up somebody more competent, or one of my later videos in which I show you the actual proper way to put buttons on and make them even, because this is not how you do it. Alright, skipping ahead. So now we're back to the back piece. And for this, I had a piece of ribbon and I had my cute little buttons, and I basically just sewed the button down over the piece of ribbon to make it look like the buttons were something that you could undo or maybe open it up so you didn't have to have it pinned in the back, but really you do, because I just sewed it straight down. It's decorative. Right? Yeah. And apparently I sewed this off screen, so apologies for that. It was basically just using my safety pins as guides. And then you do the other side. Try to make it as nice and even as possible. I just flamed the edge real quick there because it's polyester ribbon, so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to unravel on me. Apparently I only did the two. Really? I was really putting these off. I clearly did not want to do them. Anyway, we're going to skip those two. Oh, hey, look, we're done. So this shirt was an adventure, and I thank you for joining me. Please hit that like and subscribe if you want to see more of the same. Have a good one, guys.